everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to do a video which I'm very excited about. I say that about all videos, but I am very excited because I'm going to do a video in which I talk about 13 different genres, but then I give you one recommendation per genre. As you know, I have lately been interested to dive into different genres, and that's kind of what inspired me to do this video. So let's get started. I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to start with one of my favorite genres, or at least it used to be some years ago. I'm not too sure anymore, mostly because it's very hard to find that great books within that genre. I'm talking about Dystopia, and I have decided to highlight The Sunlight Pilgrims by Jenny Fagan. So this is a book set in a world which is just, I think it's set in a world 4 years from now. In this world, the globe has frozen over and we are basically living in an ice age. It's very disturbing, and we get to follow some people who try to survive this extreme setting, these new conditions, and they're doing pretty well, but of course they're going through some obstacles on their way. I love this book especially because it's very disturbing, but also because of the characters, which are very well developed, I think, and I definitely recommend this book. Also, this one comes with a gorgeous cover. Let's continue with a genre that is less disturbing, and that is romance slash chick lit slash contemporary. I don't really know how to define this one, but nevertheless I've decided to go for a Jojo Moyes book. This is Me Before You. This is the Danish title, but don't let that distract you. You might have already heard of this book or seen the movie, which is now out. I remember reading this book when I was a teenager, or when it came out. Maybe I wasn't a teenager. I am a little bit older than that. I don't think I loved it as much as everyone else did, but when I watched the movie some years ago, I fell head over heels in love with this story. I know some people have some problems with it, but I think that if you can just go with it and not take it too seriously, but just enjoy it for its sweet romance story, then it's definitely a heartwarming novel that I do recommend. Jojo Moyes is a master at writing cute romance stories. I recommend all of her books, at least most of them. There is one book maybe I wouldn't recommend, but let's not talk about that. I'm going to continue with non-fiction, which is not really a genre. I mean, there are different genres within non-fiction, but I've decided to just call this genre non-fiction, and then I've decided to go with a book that I could have gone in so many directions, but I decided to go in this direction. This is one of those non-fiction books that will make you feel so good inside. It's one that I read in the spring this year, and I still can't help thinking about it. I wish I could go back into this world for the first time and read it. If you don't know already, this is obviously The Diary of a Bookseller by Sean Bythell. You can find this bookshop in Scotland, and you can find this bookseller. So basically it gives us the diary of a bookseller, and it's not that easy of a job. You realize that when reading this. You have to get used to the tone of voice to begin with, which is very pessimistic, and I didn't like it one bit. But that's one of the things that surprised me about this book. The fact that I ended up loving it despite its very pessimistic tone of voice. Such a heartwarming story, and a book that will definitely make you want to go out and read all of the books. Next I have sci-fi, and I must admit I'm not the biggest reader of sci-fi. I like reading it once in a while, but once again it's a genre that I find is quite hard for me to find a really great book in. But I had to go for the obvious choice because I do have one favorite book of mine that is actually science fiction, and that is obviously The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I have read the second book, which is more of a companion novel. I do prefer the first book, this one, but I'm also excited to read the third one, which will be out sometime this year. Anyway, this is sci-fi because it's set in space. We follow a cast of characters who are endearing and hilarious, and I loved reading about them. But it's also a book about how we have to accept and respect different species and how that is possible. So it's a book that comes with an important message, and it's one that I truly adored, even though it is sci-fi. Crime is my next genre, and I have gotten a little bit more into crime lately, but I decided to go for a book that I haven't read recently. That's a lie. I read it last summer as a reread because I love it so much. It's a book that's great for reading in the summer, I think, for some reason. Anyway, the book is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson, the first book in the Millennium trilogy, but basically all 3 books in that trilogy are worth reading. This is the Danish cover once again, so don't be distracted. I love this series to pieces. I mean, it's crime, but it's done in such a way that sticks with you for the rest of your life. At least it has to me. Lisbeth Salander is one of the most famous characters from this series. In this book we actually follow Mikael Blomkvist more closely, so that Lisbeth Salander is not very prevalent until the second book. This book, the first one, is set in Sweden. It's basically about Michael, who is a journalist and who receives a telephone call from an unknown man who wants for him to investigate his daughter's disappearance about 30 years ago. The thing is that even though people have given up on finding her, her father believes that she is still alive because every year on the same date he receives a very special letter that must be from her. I need to remember to breathe. Next genre is fantasy, and I like a bit of fantasy now and then, so it's no surprise that I do have a few options for this one. I decided to go for a book that is my absolute favorite fantasy book, at least when it comes to adult fiction, because obviously Harry Potter is my favorite, but adult fantasy, I had to go for The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. There was no question about it. In this book we follow Quoth, who is a bartender and who tells us of his life, which has been very eventful. It's a book set in a world that is magical, and it's, even though it's a huge novel, you fly through it, and I remember loving this to pieces. There is also a second book out, which I love to pieces as well. The third book we are still waiting for. Historical fiction is my next genre, and for that one I had to go with an old favorite, and that is Paulina Simon's The Bronze Horseman, another trilogy in which this is the first book. This book is set in Russia during World War II. It's about Tatiana and her family who live in Petrograd, I think that's what it's called. During the winter, during the war, they have no access to food, and that goes for all the people in the city. No access to food, no access to water, all the basic necessities are gone. And then one day Tatiana stumbles across a handsome soldier whom she falls in love with. So this is both historical fiction based on war and poverty, but also surrounding romance, and I think it's done beautifully, beautifully well. I decided to make modern classics a genre because I really wanted to include this book and this author. I'm talking about East of Eden by John Steinbeck, which is also an amazing book to read during summer, but basically all year round you can obviously read it. This one is set in America, as are all of John Steinbeck's books, but this one deals with twin brothers and their father, their uncle, and a woman called Kathy, who is the most evil woman I've ever encountered in fiction. I love her. Their stories entwine so that the first part of the book is actually more about Kathy and their father, and then the second half of the book is when we get to actually meet the twins, who are adorable. I love them. I love this book so much. It's one of my favorite books of all time. As I said, it's just one that is great to read during summer because it's set in the southern states during the warm days of sun and dry throats. I don't know what I'm saying, but basically this book is one I highly recommend. I also had to go for a classic. I think the difference between modern classics and classics is the fact that a classic is more than 100 years old. Correct me if I'm wrong, but for this genre I decided to go for The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is more of a macabre story about Dorian Gray, who is a young man and who desperately wants to stay young. It's also about a painting that he finds extremely fascinating, and it's about the relationship and the dynamics between Dorian Gray and this painting, and I'm not going to say anything else, but I can tell you that this book takes an unexpected twist which turns very dark and mysterious, and I love it for that. I have 4 genres left. The next one is psychological thriller. I love this genre, and I haven't read nearly enough books within that genre, so I have to correct that mistake. But for now, let me just recommend The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn, a recent favorite of mine. This one is set in New York City, and it follows our main character, whose name I can't recall, Anna Fox. Yes, Anna Fox is agoraphobic, which means that she suffers from a disease that won't allow for her to go outside in public. She basically lives in her apartment in New York City all by herself, and what she does is that she spies her neighbors out of her window, which sounds very creepy, and it is. But then one day she spies some event that is horrible and she can't neglect it, and she has to do something about it. I love this book so much so that I read it the first time on my Kindle, and then I had to get the physical copy because I wanted one. So I actually bought this book twice, that's how much I love it. I think it's time for a Western. Western is just the most amazing genre, both when it comes to movies but also when it comes to books. My father is a huge Western fan, so it's a genre that's always been part of my life, and I think that's one of the reasons I love it so much. I have found a book which I consider a Western, but correct me if I'm wrong. I'm talking about Bridges Crossing by John Williams. This is about 3 men who decide to go on a journey to the wilderness of America, I believe Colorado or somewhere nearby, to shoot buffaloes. This book comes with some very vivid scenes that I still think about. It also comes with a beautiful description of the setting. You basically feel like your throat is drying up when you read this book, and I loved it for that. It's a perfect Western because it makes you feel like you are in a Western, and those scenes that are so vivid are perfection. John Williams is an amazing author in my opinion. He writes such different books, and this is one of my favorites of his. Let's go to horror, which is also another favorite of mine that I don't read nearly enough from, and I decided to go for a short story collection, The Dollmaster and Other Tales of Terror by Joyce Carol Oates. These are stories that all revolve around some kind of terror. I think that these stories are pretty disturbing, but I love it for that. Oates is very great at creating this tense feeling and this suspenseful situation that makes you cling to your seat and want to keep on reading. So if you're into horror, I definitely recommend that you check out this short story collection by Joyce Carol Oates. I have saved the best for last. I have saved the genre which I believe that most people connect me and my channel with that genre, and I believe that it's the genre that I read the most from. I love it to pieces and I can't get enough of it. The thing is, I still don't know how to define the genre. All I know is that it's called literary fiction, and I think I found out that it's the genre that is undefinable, meaning that it's a genre that authors write in if they are not horror authors or crime authors or whatever. It's also a genre that deals very much with people and realism, but I could be wrong about that. So as I said, I'm still not sure how to define this genre, but I do think that the book in my hands is within this genre of literary fiction. My Absolute Darling by Gabrielle Talent. This is a book that I read about 1 or 2 years ago, and it made a huge impression on me. It's about our main character, who is a young teenager who lives alone with her father in the United States. Her father's upbringing of her is brutal, and this book comes with such vivid and horrifying scenes that you have to have the stomach to read it, and I'm not sure I have that stomach, but I read it and I loved it, so I think that you will be able to read it as well and maybe love it. It's a beautiful coming-of-age story about this insecure girl who wants to please her father on one side, but who also knows that she has to escape him in order to survive and become her own independent woman. And that is it for all of my genre recommendations. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until my next one, happy reading!